Living in Sunnyside Estates wasn't my first choice. It was a compromise. The house was smaller than I wanted, the HOA fees higher than I liked, and the neighbors just a little too interested in each other's business. But the location worked perfectly for my commute to the VA hospital, and the community's walking trails were exactly what Maverick, my golden retriever and service dog, needed. Maverick wasn't just a pet. He was my lifeline. After years of military service overseas, I came back home carrying things no uniform could protect me from, the kind of battles that start when the war is already over. Maverick helped me manage the shadows that followed, my PTSD, the sudden flashes of memory, the sleepless nights. He'd been trained to sense an episode before it even began. One nudge from him could pull me out of a spiral faster than any medication could. He wore his red service vest with pride. Patches clearly marked "Service Dog. Do not distract." He was calm, obedient, and the most disciplined soul I knew. Wherever I went, Maverick followed, never ahead, never behind. I thought I understood people. I thought I'd faced enough hostility in my life to know what to expect. But then I met Karen Whitfield Dodd. It was on my second day in Sunnyside Estates. The morning sun glowed off the manicured lawns, sprinklers hissed softly, and I was just returning from Maverick's walk when I saw her. Khaki shorts, pressed polo shirt, clipboard in hand. Lips pursed like she'd bitten into a lemon. "You must be the new resident," she said, scanning me up and down like she was inspecting a trespasser rather than greeting a neighbor. "I'm Karen Whitfield, HOA president." Her tone carried authority, or at least her version of it. I extended a hand, polite as always, but she didn't shake it. Her eyes dropped to Maverick, who sat beside me in perfect posture, head slightly tilted, tail still. "I don't recall approving a dog in this community," she said sharply. Her words weren't a question. They were a challenge. I stayed calm. "He's not a pet. He's a service dog." Her eyebrows lifted. "A service dog? For what, exactly?" I felt the question slice deeper than she realized. "For a disability covered under federal law," I said evenly. "He's protected under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act." Karen's mouth twisted. "People are always finding loopholes," she muttered, scribbling something on her clipboard before walking off. Heels clicking against the pavement. That was my introduction to Sunnyside Estates. I wish I'd known then. That moment wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a war I didn't see coming. The next few weeks felt like living under surveillance. Small things at first. A friendly reminder taped to my door that my grass was 1/4 inch too tall. A violation notice because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black, and another because my trash can was visible from the street for exactly 45 minutes after pickup. Each letter wore the same elaborate signature, Karen Whitfield, HOA president, finished off with a tiny smiley face that somehow felt like a threat. I fixed everything. I trimmed the grass. I repainted the mailbox. I even set a timer for garbage day. But the notices kept coming. Maverick sensed my tension. He'd rest his head on my knee when I sat outside, watching Karen make her patrols like a prison warden inspecting her yard. She'd slow her walk whenever she passed my porch, eyes darting between me and the dog. Then came the meeting. The HOA monthly gathering was held in the community clubhouse. Pastel walls, folding chairs, lemonade on the table, and that strange suburban tension thick in the air. I sat near the back with Maverick beside me. Karen opened the meeting with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "First order of business, pet compliance." The words made me sit up. She continued, effective immediately. "I'm proposing a rule that all animals, including service dogs, must be registered with the HOA and display board-approved identification tags." I raised my hand. "That violates the ADA," I said, my voice steady. Service animals are federally exempt from local registration and identification requirements. Karen's smile cracked. Federal laws don't override community standards. She snapped. The room went quiet. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between us. No one spoke. She banged her gavel and moved on to the next topic as if I hadn't said a word. When the meeting ended, Karen approached me privately, her heels clicking like a metronome of irritation. She leaned close, her breath heavy with coffee. "If you want to be difficult," she whispered, "I can be difficult too." Then she walked off, calm, controlled, dangerous. I remember standing there, Maverick beside me, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. My instincts, the same ones that had saved my life overseas, whispered something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't over. The next few days passed quietly. Too quietly. No new notices. No letters. No confrontations. But calm before a storm always feels peaceful until the wind changes. That morning, the sun had barely risen when I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee. Maverick lay at my feet, watching birds dart between the trees. It was one of those moments where the world felt still again, until I saw her Karen standing on my lawn. Khaki shorts, polo shirt, clipboard in one hand, and a spray bottle in the other. "Your dog," she called out, loud enough for the neighbors to peek from their blinds, "is in violation of the new pet ordinance. No proper HOA identification." I took a slow breath. "That rule hasn't even been approved yet," I reminded her. "And again, he's a service animal. Federal law." Her face reddened. "I'm tired of you military types thinking you're above the rules," she hissed, stepping closer. "If you won't comply, I'll handle it myself." Before I could move, she raised the bottle and sprayed Maverick directly in the face. He yelped, recoiling, pawing desperately at his eyes. My heart stopped. "What's in that bottle?" I shouted, moving between them. Karen smiled, actually smiled. "Just vinegar and water. Won't hurt him. Maybe now he'll respect authority." For a moment, everything inside me went silent, not from fear, but from training. The soldier in me took over. I led Maverick inside, rinsed his eyes, whispering calm words as he whimpered. The smell of vinegar filled the air. No permanent damage. Thank God, but something in me had snapped, not in anger, but in resolve. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" "My service dog was assaulted," I said evenly, "by my HOA president. This is a federal offense." As I hung up, I looked out the window. Karen still stood on the lawn, arms crossed, expression smug. She had no idea what she'd just done, because this wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a federal crime, and the storm she'd started was about to swallow her whole. The call to 911 had barely ended when reality settled in. My hands trembled slightly as I knelt beside Maverick, running a damp towel gently over his fur. His eyes were still irritated, red around the corners, but he stayed calm, ever the professional. He looked at me the way he always did during tough moments. Steady, loyal, reassuring. "Good boy," I murmured, my voice cracking just enough to betray what I felt inside. Anger simmered under the surface, not the wild, uncontrolled kind, but the cold, deliberate sort that soldiers learn to live with. Outside, I could still see Karen Whitfield pacing my lawn, her phone in one hand, her posture stiff with self-righteous authority. She was likely calling the HOA board, preparing her version of the story. But it didn't matter. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was federal. About 20 minutes later, the familiar flash of blue and red lights painted the front of my house. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car, one older, with a calm demeanor and the sort of eyes that had seen 1,000 disputes. The other younger, still carrying that posture of someone new to the job. Eager but uncertain, I stepped outside to meet them. "Sir," the older officer greeted. "We got your call about an assault involving your service dog?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm the one who called. My dog's name is Maverick. He's a federally registered service animal. My HOA president sprayed him in the face with some kind of liquid." The younger officer frowned. "Sprayed? Like pepper spray?" "Vinegar and water, according to her," I said. "He's fine now, but it still counts as interference with a service animal." The older one pulled out his notebook. "That's correct. ADA Title II and III protections apply here. Do you have his certification or documentation handy?" I went inside and returned with Maverick's service certification, his training record, and medical documentation confirming my PTSD diagnosis. Standard paperwork I kept for moments like this. They inspected everything carefully. "All right," the older officer said, nodding. "You've done everything by the book. We'll talk to the suspect." I gestured toward Karen's house. She was standing on her porch now, arms folded, that same glare of superiority glued to her face. The officers approached her while I stayed behind, watching from my window. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. Karen's body language said enough, her exaggerated gestures, her sharp finger pointing toward my home, and the eventual way her face twisted into visible frustration. After a few minutes, the officers returned. "She admitted she sprayed the dog," the older one said. "Claimed she was enforcing community standards." I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. Community standards don't override federal law. "Exactly," the officer replied. "We've informed her that interfering with a service animal is a federal offense under the ADA. It's also considered animal cruelty under state law. We're placing her under arrest. Would you like to press charges formally?" There was no hesitation. "Yes, I want to press charges." The officers nodded. I watched through the window as they placed Karen in handcuffs. Her face went from shock to fury, her voice rising in shrill protests that carried across the neighborhood. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president," she yelled, struggling against the officers. But her authority meant nothing now. Neighbors peeked through blinds, phones recording from behind curtains. One older woman down the street came out onto her porch, her hand covering her mouth. Another neighbor, a man I'd only nodded to a few times, whispered. She finally went too far. Karen continued shouting, swearing that she'd have me evicted, that this was all a setup, that I was abusing veteran privilege. But as the police car door closed behind her, the sound of her voice became just another echo of her own downfall. Inside, Maverick had settled beside the couch. His breathing was slow, steady. When I sat next to him, he placed his head on my knee, eyes half closed, trusting Dot in that moment. I felt something shift inside me, a mixture of pride, sorrow, and exhaustion. He didn't understand the details, but he understood that something had happened, and that he had done nothing wrong. "Good boy," I whispered again. "You didn't deserve any of this." I knew this wasn't over. Arrests are one thing, justice is another. Karen was the kind of person who wouldn't go down quietly. She'd find a way to twist this, to play the victim, to rally anyone who still believed her version of authority. Sure enough, within hours, the HOA's private Facebook group lit up. A few screenshots made their way to me, Karen's loyal followers claiming she was unjustly arrested and targeted by a new homeowner exploiting his military status. But not everyone was fooled. More and more neighbors started asking questions about her leadership, her past conflicts, the number of people who'd quietly moved away because of her harassment. By evening, my phone rang. It was Tom Henderson, the HOA vice president, a mild, polite man I'd barely spoken to before. "Listen," he said, his tone low and uneasy. "The board's meeting tomorrow to discuss what happened. You should probably come." People are not happy with Karen. The next day, the community clubhouse was packed. More residents showed up than ever before. Even people who never attended meetings came out of curiosity or maybe relief. Maverick sat beside me, calm as always, his vest freshly cleaned. Tom stood at the front, clearing his throat. As you all know, he began, Ms. Whitfield was arrested yesterday for an incident involving a resident service animal. The board has reviewed the police report and verified that federal and state laws were violated. Effective immediately, I'm calling for an emergency vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. A murmur swept through the crowd. From somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "About time." The vote was quick, almost anticlimactic. One by one, hands went up. Every single homeowner voted yes. Just like that, the reign of Karen Whitfield was over. Her nameplate was removed from the table, and the vice president took temporary control of the board. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there quietly, Maverick leaning against my leg. Tom approached me afterward. "For what it's worth," he said, "we're sorry. She's been running this place like her personal kingdom for too long. Nobody wanted to stand up to her." I nodded. "It's not easy to face a bully." He gave a faint smile. "No, but you did. And you had the law on your side." That night, I walked Maverick down the trail behind the neighborhood. The air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet. For the first time since moving to Sunnyside Estates, the silence felt peaceful instead of heavy. But even as the breeze brushed against my skin, I couldn't shake the thought of Karen's last words before being led away. Her voice strained, bitter, dripping with venom. "This isn't over," she'd hissed. And knowing her type, I believed it. I just didn't realize how far she'd go to prove it. The day after Karen's arrest, Sunnyside Estates felt different, lighter somehow. The usual tension that hung in the air, the constant sense of being watched, was gone. Neighbors who used to look away now nodded when I passed. A few even stopped to chat. For the first time, I thought maybe this neighborhood could actually feel like home. But peace in places like this never lasts. Especially when someone like Karen Whitfield still had something to prove. She was out of jail within 48 hours. Her lawyer had managed to secure temporary release while the case moved forward. I learned this from a neighbor's post on the community page. Karen's back. Brace yourselves. That same night, I noticed her SUV creeping slowly down the street. Its headlights swept across my driveway before pausing. I stood at the window, watching. The car didn't move for several seconds. Then the engine revved, and it pulled off into the darkness. Maverick, always attuned to me, stood alert beside the window, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the street. I rested my hand on his back. "It's all right, buddy," I said quietly. But I wasn't sure I believed it. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. It began small. A note tucked under my door. "You don't belong here. Some of us have standards." Then, a day later, I found a smear of something sticky, maybe syrup or oil, across my car windshield. Harmless, but deliberate. Next came the emails. Anonymous, of course. Messages filled with accusations. That I was faking a disability, that my service dog was just a pet with a vest, that I was using pity for privilege. I recognized Karen's writing style immediately. The overuse of commas. The same passive-aggressive tone she'd used in her violation notices. But I didn't respond. People like her feed on reactions, and silence is the only thing they can't manipulate. Still, it wasn't easy ignoring it. Each morning I walked Maverick, I could feel eyes on me. Curtains shifting. A door closing just as we passed. Fear has a way of spreading like a whisper, invisible but contagious. Then came the real escalation. It was early morning. The sky was still gray, dew clinging to every blade of grass. I stepped outside to take Maverick for his usual walk. He trotted ahead, leash loose, tail swinging gently. When we reached the corner near the community mailboxes, Maverick froze. His ears perked up, nose twitching. Then I saw it, broken glass shattered across the sidewalk, shards glittering under the weak morning light. I bent down, heart sinking. It wasn't random trash. Someone had smashed a bottle intentionally, right where Maverick usually stepped. I scanned the street. Empty. Too quiet. I led Maverick home and took pictures immediately. Evidence. I wasn't going to let this slide. At that moment, I knew for sure Karen was back. And this was her war. Later that afternoon, a knock echoed at my door. I opened it to find Officer Ramirez, one of the same cops who'd arrested Karen. "Mr. Hayes," he said, nodding. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside. Maverick sniffed his pant leg once before settling at my feet. Karen Whitfield's attorney contacted the department. Ramirez explained. "She's claiming she's being harassed by you, says you've been intimidating her, trying to influence her neighbors." I almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter. "She's the one stalking me, officer. She's been driving past my house, leaving notes, and now someone tried to hurt my dog again." Ramirez nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds more like the Karen I met. But just so, you know, keep everything documented. If this escalates, you'll want a clean record." I showed him the note, the photos of the glass, the screenshots of the anonymous emails. He looked through them carefully, his face tightening. "This is solid," he said. "We'll add it to the report. And if she violates her restraining conditions, it'll count against her during trial." Restraining conditions. I hadn't realized she even had those. "Technically," Ramirez continued, "she's not supposed to contact you directly or indirectly. These messages count. I'll make sure the DA sees this." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. Someone was paying attention, but Karen wasn't finished. 2 nights later, I woke to Maverick growling low and deep from beside the bed. That sound, primal and controlled, was something I'd only heard from him once before. During a training drill involving intruders. My instincts kicked in instantly. I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand and moved toward the front window. Outside, through the thin curtain, I caught the faint outline of a figure standing by my fence, motionless, watching. The light from the porch caught something shiny, a phone. I flipped on the flashlight and pointed it straight through the glass. The figure jerked back, startled. For a second, I saw her face clearly. Karen. Her eyes widened, fury and fear mixing into something almost unhinged. She turned and sprinted off toward her SUV, which was parked a few houses down. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding in the silence she left behind. Maverick sat by my side, eyes still fixed on the door. The next morning, I filed another report. Ramirez called me later, his voice edged with disbelief. "She's out on bail and already violating the restraining order," he said. "This will go straight to the prosecutor. Don't worry, this time she won't walk away with just a warning." But Karen's pride wouldn't let her stop. Even as legal trouble piled up, she doubled down online. In a Facebook group for local homeowners. She began posting edited clips from her security cameras, moments of Maverick walking near other lawns, paired with captions like, "See how aggressive he looks. He's a danger to kids. This man is exploiting the ADA." It was absurd, but it spread fast. People love drama more than truth, and a few gullible residents began whispering again. For every person who defended me, another seemed to feed Karen's fire. The HOA board tried to intervene, issuing a public statement distancing themselves from her. But she didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that's when people are most dangerous. One evening, Tom Henderson stopped by my house. He looked exhausted. "She's suing the HOA," he said. claims wrongful removal and defamation. She's naming you in it too. I stared at him. For what? For mental distress caused by false accusations. He sighed. We know it's nonsense, but it's going to drag out the case. A lawyer's good at stirring chaos. The news hit hard, but not because I was scared, because I was tired. Every time I thought this battle was over, she found another way to pull me back in. But Maverick, as always, grounded me. That night, as I sat on the porch, he rested his head against my leg. The street was quiet again, cicadas humming in the distance. I looked at him and whispered, "We've been through worse, haven't we?" His tail thumped once, slow and steady. I didn't know it yet. But Karen's obsession was about to cross the one line even she couldn't come back from. The next chapter of this war wouldn't be fought with rules or fines or online posts. It would be fought in court and in the open. The tension in the neighborhood had transformed into something far darker than simple gossip. What had once been whispered curiosity about a dog and an a complaint, now became a full-blown campaign of hostility. By the time the 4th week after the attack arrived, it felt as though every mailbox, every fence, every glance carried the residue of that one moment when Karen sprayed the service dog and destroyed her own peace. The HOA board met again, but this time without their usual smug smiles or the comfortable authority they once enjoyed. Half of the members had resigned after the arrest. The remaining ones looked nervous, whispering about media pressure and federal investigations. Cameras were often spotted at the neighborhood entrance now. Reporters wanted footage, interviews, reactions. What they got were tight lips and closed doors. For the narrator, the service dog's owner, it was no longer about revenge or anger. It was about safety. Every time they walked outside, there was a quiet paranoia in the air. Even though the police had already charged Karen and she was awaiting trial, her husband had begun to act erratic. He blamed everyone but her, the neighbors, the dog, the system. At night, lights flickered on in his house, and angry yelling could sometimes be heard through the quiet street. The service dog, once confident and brave, had changed too. It moved slower, eyes darting toward bushes or fences, as if remembering the pain of that chemical spray. The owner had spent hours retraining it, helping it rely on trust. The bond was still there, but the innocence was gone. A week after Karen's arrest, an unmarked car began parking across the street. Sometimes it stayed for hours. Other times, it followed when the owner left for work. When they called the police, the officer confirmed that it was federal, not a threat, but part of the ongoing case. Karen's actions had violated multiple federal laws involving service animals, and the investigation now stretched beyond the HOA. Still, the presence of the car was both comforting and unsettling. Protection came with the reminder of danger. Then came the notice. A thick envelope in the mailbox, stamped with the HOA seal. Inside, a letter demanded payment for neighborhood damages caused by the incident. It accused the victim of bringing unwanted media attention and disrupting community harmony. The irony was so deep it almost felt unreal. The victim didn't react with rage this time, just exhaustion. The letter was taken straight to the attorney. That's when the tide began to shift again, this time, not emotionally, but legally. The attorney filed a countersuit for harassment, negligence, and emotional distress. Documents were submitted. Statements recorded. What started as a petty neighborhood feud had now evolved into a full civil and criminal battle. Local news began covering it like a scandal. HOA war over service dog attack. Headlines carried Karen's mugshot, hair disheveled, eyes distant, makeup streaked. The federal charge had shocked the community. Intentional harm to a service animal, a federal offense. The penalty was severe, and she was already facing multiple misdemeanors on top of it. Neighbors, who once avoided eye contact, started offering quiet support. A few even apologized for not stepping in sooner. One elderly resident left a note on the doorstep. What she did was wrong. We should have spoken up before it came to this. But beneath the surface, the fear didn't go away. The neighborhood's sense of unity was gone. Homeowners were selling their houses, and prospective buyers avoided the area. The HOA's reputation was tarnished. Meetings were empty. The lawns, once manicured to perfection, now showed patches of neglect, as if the entire community had lost interest in pretending. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the owner took their dog for a walk, the same route as before, cautious but determined. The dog's gait had regained a little strength. Its fur shimmered under the fading light, and for a brief moment, it felt normal again. Then a shadow appeared at the edge of the street. Karen's husband. He wasn't shouting this time. He wasn't threatening. He was simply standing still, eyes glassy, holding a small box. He placed it on the curb, turned, and walked away. The owner hesitated, unsure whether to approach. When they finally opened the box, it wasn't a threat. It was a quiet apology, a note written in uneven handwriting. She didn't mean to hurt your dog. She just lost control. I lost her too. Beneath it, a small photo. Karen smiling with the same dog years earlier. Back when she wasn't yet the HOA Karen the world now knew. For the first time, there was a glimmer of understanding. Not forgiveness, but perspective. Behind the arrogance, the rules, and the rage, there had once been a person who'd simply lost her way in her need to control everything. Days later, a new report surfaced. Karen had pleaded guilty. Her sentence, 1 year in federal prison and community service involving animal rehabilitation. The internet lit up with opinions, half mocking, half cheering for justice. The HOA was ordered to restructure under new management. And as the dust finally began to settle, the neighborhood returned to something resembling peace. But it wasn't the same peace. It was quieter, older, scarred. The service dog's owner finally stood on their porch, watching the street where it all began. The air smelled of rain and redemption. Somewhere, a child's laughter broke through the evening silence. Justice had come, but it didn't erase the memory. It simply turned it into a lesson, carved deep into the fabric of the neighborhood. Control can destroy. Compassion can rebuild. And sometimes it takes the breaking point to make people see what really matters. The courthouse was silent that morning, unnervingly so. The kind of silence that came before something irreversible. The case of State versus Karen H. had drawn attention far beyond the little suburban enclave where it began. News vans lined the street. Reporters jostled for camera angles. And the courthouse steps were filled with murmuring neighbors who had once nodded politely at each other over trimmed hedges and manicured lawns. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, yet cold. The polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the tension that filled every corner. The service dog's owner sat on the left side of the courtroom, back straight, the dog lying quietly at their feet. The animal's eyes flicked from one person to another, cautious, yet alert, as if understanding that this day was about more than punishment. It was about closure. Across the room sat Karen. Her once pristine posture had wilted. Her hair, usually styled with suburban precision, hung loose and dull. She looked smaller than anyone remembered, not in height, but in presence. Gone was the air of superiority. The clipped tone, the HOA badge she once wore like armor. She sat there in a plain gray suit, hands trembling slightly on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. Her attorney whispered something, but she didn't respond. Perhaps she knew that no amount of legal language could undo what she had done. The moment she raised that spray bottle and pulled the trigger, She had crossed a line that no HOA rulebook could excuse. The prosecutor stood, addressing the judge with a measured calm that carried the weight of federal law. "This case," he began, "is not about neighborly disputes or minor violations. It is about deliberate harm, the intentional assault of a federally protected service animal, an act punishable under federal statute." He paused, glancing briefly at Karen. The defendant's actions caused not only physical harm to the dog, but emotional and psychological trauma to its owner. A service animal is not a pet. It is a lifeline. Those words hung heavy in the air. The service dog's owner felt a quiet shiver run through their chest. A lifeline, yes. That dog had been through airports, hospitals, and crowded streets. It had been there during anxiety attacks, during dark nights when sleep wouldn't come. It was more than an animal. It was a companion that restored balance to a life constantly tested. Karen's defense attorney rose next, his voice softer, almost pleading. "My client acted impulsively. It was a moment of misplaced anger, not malice. She has no prior criminal record. She deeply regrets. Regret doesn't erase federal law," the judge interrupted. The gavel struck once, sharp and echoing. "Continue." The defense lawyer hesitated, then sat down. Even he knew it was a losing battle. Then came the moment everyone waited for. The verdict. Karen stood slowly as the clerk read the charges. Count 1. Violation of the Federal Protection of Service Animals Act. Guilty. Count 2. Assault. Guilty. Count 3. Reckless endangerment. Guilty. The words felt final, like stones dropping into water, each one rippling outward. Karen didn't cry. She didn't gasp or argue. She simply closed her eyes, as if the weight of her choices finally settled on her shoulders. The judge looked directly at her. "Mrs. H., your behavior was not just reckless, it was cruel. You abused authority, you instigated fear, and you caused lasting harm. This court sentences you to 1 year in federal custody, followed by 12 months of probation and mandatory community service in animal rehabilitation." Gasps filled the courtroom. Cameras clicked outside like thunder. Karen nodded faintly, no fight left in her. As the bailiff approached, she looked up for the first time and met the service dog's owner's eyes. For a second, something human flickered there. Sorrow, maybe shame. And in that brief exchange, the owner felt no triumph. Just an ache that justice never felt as satisfying as people imagined. When she was escorted out, the crowd outside erupted. Some cheered, others recorded. The story would soon become viral again. HOA Karen sentenced for attacking service dog. But for those who lived it, it wasn't content. It was closure. In the days that followed, the neighborhood's foundation began to crumble. The HOA, already under scrutiny, faced a flood of resignations. Financial audits revealed misused funds and unethical fines imposed over the years. The new board, hastily assembled, voted to dissolve the old leadership structure entirely. Lawsuits followed. Homeowners demanded refunds for unlawful penalties. Federal investigators subpoenaed old records. What had started as a single act of cruelty had exposed a web of greed and corruption buried under a facade of community management. The service dog's owner became something of a reluctant local figure, not famous, but respected. They didn't do interviews. They didn't post online statements. They just went about life quietly, letting the world interpret the story however it wanted. Meanwhile, the service dog began healing in its own way. Its fur had grown back where the chemical had burned. Its stride returned to normal. Yet, it still hesitated near strangers, as if remembering. Trauma leaves marks that time doesn't always erase. One evening, months later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just a faint scent of lavender and the careful, Neat handwriting of someone who used to pride themselves on order. "I don't expect forgiveness," it read. "But I'm learning to understand. They have me working with rescue animals now. They trust me with creatures who've been hurt. The irony isn't lost on me. I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven, but maybe they will. Maybe that's enough." The letter ended there. No signature. But the meaning was clear. Karen was serving her sentence, not just physically, but emotionally, learning empathy the hard way. By the time spring arrived, the neighborhood looked different. The fences had new paint. The lawns were wilder, more natural. The strict HOA rules that once governed every blade of grass were gone. People talked more, smiled more, and for the first time, lived without fear of citations or petty power. The service dog would sometimes stop and sit by the mailbox, the same place where the first HOA letter of complaint had come months earlier. Its owner would stand quietly beside it, feeling the breeze roll through the quiet street, remembering how chaos had turned into something like peace. Justice had been served. But more importantly, balance had been restored. Months drifted by like calm waves after a storm. Sunnyside estates, once ruled by regulations, citations, and whispers of authority, had changed in quiet, remarkable ways. The air no longer felt heavy. The neighborhood, which used to echo with Karen Whitfield's demands and complaints, now carried laughter, footsteps, and the steady hum of normal life returning. The lawns no longer competed in perfection. Some had wildflowers creeping along the edges. Others hosted bird feeders or small vegetable gardens. A few fences were painted in bright, rebellious colors. For the first time, Sunnyside Estates looked alive. On an early summer morning, sunlight poured through the trees as the service dog's owner, whose name most neighbors now knew, stepped out for their usual walk. Maverick trotted ahead, his golden fur gleaming, the red service vest secured snugly around his chest. His steps were confident again, tail relaxed, ears perked. Healing had taken time. After the attack, Maverick had grown skittish. He'd flinch at spray bottles or sudden gestures. The sight of khaki shorts, Karen's uniform of control, would send him retreating behind his owner. But with patience, care, and countless quiet moments, he had relearned trust. The neighborhood seemed to have gone through the same process. People waved now, genuine, friendly waves. Some even stopped to chat. They'd ask about Maverick, offer him treats, and share how things had improved since the new HOA leadership took over. For years, everyone had lived under Karen's silent pressure, her constant watchfulness, her need for control. When she fell, it was as if the entire community exhaled for the first time in years. The new HOA president, a soft-spoken woman named Denise, had vowed to bring humanity back to the neighborhood. Meetings were no longer battlegrounds. They were gatherings, potlucks, open discussions, shared laughs. Rules were reduced to essentials: safety, cleanliness, respect. Nothing more. Still, Karen's shadow lingered. Her trial had made national headlines, briefly. The term, HOA Karen, became a catchphrase online. People used it for stories of entitled authority, of suburban tyranny. But for those who lived it, she was not a meme. She was a memory, a painful lesson in what unchecked control could become. The owner had received another letter from Karen after her release. It came on plain stationery. The handwriting slightly shakier this time. "I've completed my sentence." The community service was the hardest part, not because of the work, but because every animal reminded me of what I took for granted: trust. The shelter staff didn't know who I was, and maybe that was for the best. I just cleaned cages, fed strays, and learned to listen instead of command. I don't expect to return to Sunnyside, but I hope the neighborhood breathes easier without me. I'm trying to become someone my own reflection doesn't flinch from. Tell Maverick, I'm sorry. There were no dramatic apologies, no pleas for forgiveness. just quiet acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt more real than anything else could have. The owner folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, beside Maverick's certification papers. Some scars didn't need to be reopened. Life went on. The day Maverick was officially cleared by the vet. No lingering irritation, no trauma symptoms. They went for a longer walk than usual. Down the trail behind the houses, through the trees that whispered with early summer wind. The same trail where months ago fear had lived. Now, birds chirped above. The world felt whole again. A new family had moved into Karen's old house. They'd painted the door blue, added hanging flower pots, and replaced the security cameras with a simple wooden sign that read, "Welcome, friends." It was almost poetic. The house that had once symbolized authority now stood for kindness. As they passed, the new owner waved from the porch. "Beautiful dog," she called. The service dog's owner smiled. "He's the best." Maverick wagged his tail, as if agreeing. The legal battles were over, the tension gone, but something had changed deep inside. The experience had hardened and softened them both, hardened their resolve, softened their view of others. Not everyone who enforced rules was cruel. Not every neighbor was indifferent. It just took one person's courage and one dog's loyalty to break the silence. Later that week, during a community event at the park, Maverick sat calmly among children who ran their hands through his fur, giggling. He didn't flinch anymore. The trust had fully returned. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Pearson, leaned over and said, "You know, we used to walk on eggshells here. Karen had everyone scared. But after what you and Maverick went through, people realized fear only grows when no one stands up." The owner nodded. "He did most of the standing," they said, smiling down at Maverick. By evening, the park glowed with soft lanterns. Families picnicked on the grass. Someone brought out a guitar. For the first time in years, Sunnyside felt like a community. Not a collection of houses policed by power. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in gold and amber, Maverick rested his head on his owner's leg. The gentle hum of life surrounded them. Laughter, music, the faint rustle of leaves. For a moment, everything was quiet. Not the tense, fearful silence that had once haunted the place, but the peaceful kind, the kind born from healing. The owner looked down at Maverick. "We made it, buddy." The dog's tail thumped softly against the grass. They sat there long after the sun disappeared, letting the night settle around them. The journey that began with cruelty and fear had ended in understanding and calm. Karen's story would fade into local legend, a cautionary tale whispered among new homeowners. Don't be a Karen. But Maverick's story, the story of resilience, loyalty, and quiet strength, would live on much longer. He had reminded them all of something simple but powerful. That authority means nothing without empathy. And healing begins when fear finally ends. And so, life in Sunnyside Estates continued, imperfect, vibrant, free. The porch lights glowed one by one. The streets fell quiet again. But this time, the silence was not the sound of control. It was the sound of peace.